For this case study project, I observed Mrs. Nightenhelser, who is a kindergarten teacher at Flint Springs. She was able to give me a lot of information in her interview about how assessment is used in the early childhood classroom. In terms of general assessments used on a daily basis, Mrs. Nightenhelser said that she uses observations, quick checks in the form of questions to make sure that the students are comprehending the lesson, letter identification flashcards to make sure that the students can recognize their letters, including uppercase and lowercase letters and the sounds that they make, number identification checks, which are similar to letter identification checks, comprehension checks for reading in small groups, writing assessments used from any sort of writing work completed during the day, and morning work, which is usually just a worksheet that she uses to make sure that the children are understanding the concepts, and because the same general morning work is used all 5 days during the week, it allows Mrs. Nightenhelser to see the children grow in their understanding of the concepts being learned that week. The kinds of formal assessments used in the classroom include the letter identification flashcards, reading benchmarks, and the math and language arts test formed by the NWEA, which are given 3 times a year. These tests measure children's growth and change based on their knowledge as they individualize to each student. When it comes to informal assessment in the classroom, monthly sight word checks, running records which monitor progress, mini checks on specific skills such as syllables and rhyming, worksheets, and one-on-one conferences with the teacher are utilized. There aren't very many self-assessments used in the kindergarten classroom, but the students do develop a writing rubric together with the teacher which they can reference when they are performing writing activities to see how well they are doing. Embedded formative assessment states that developing the learning intentions jointly with the students, as Mrs. Nightenhelser does in this case, is valuable to their learning. The book 7 Strategies of Assessment for Learning also mentions the value of co-creating the criteria with students. If the students understand the criteria that they need to be working on, then it is more likely that they will be able to apply the learning intentions and success criteria in the context of their own work. In terms of literacy development specifically, letter identification checks, reading benchmarks, first sound fluency assessments, and writing rubrics that are developed as a class are used throughout the year. When it comes to mastering math skills, assessments such as patterning, sorting, number identification through 10 in the beginning, and then through 20 by the end of the year, counting objects, and writing numbers independently are used. Progress is monitored throughout the year through the use of assessments. In the beginning, these assessments start with monthly letter identification checks, monthly sight word checks, and there are 50 sight words that the children need to know by the end of the school year, so 2 are learned per week. And then progress is monitored weekly for sounds if they are not already mastered, or for phonemes, including stretching out words in order to know how to accurately pronounce them. In order to determine if the child can pass on to first grade, they must meet expectations on their report cards on the areas covered, pass reading and math benchmarks, and must be able to master the whole concepts, especially those involved in the language arts. Such assessments impact Mrs. Nightenhelser's instruction in that they guide what is going to be instructed, and it helps her to know where the students are lacking so that she can help them with these specific skills in one-on-one and small group conferences. As the book Embedded Formative Assessment states, the most effective use of formative evaluation is if it is separated from the grading process and used primarily as an aid to teaching. Evaluation, which is directly related to the teacher learning process as it unfolds, can have highly beneficial effects on the learning of students, the instructional process of teachers, and the use of instructional materials by teachers and learners. Teachers need to make use of the evidence they had collected about the achievement of their students to adjust their instruction to better meet their students' learning needs, which is exactly what Mrs. Nightenhelser does through her assessments. Like the book 7 Strategies of Assessment for Learning states she should be doing, Mrs. Nightenhelser is gathering the information about her students' understanding, interpreting it, and acting on it. Overall, I learned a lot about assessments used in the early childhood classroom. I was actually quite surprised that such assessments are not so different from the ones used in the elementary grades. Kindergartners and elementary students alike take reading benchmark assessments and the NWEA pre- and post-math tests, and most other assessment used in the classroom on a daily basis is also similar. However, kindergartners do not take the I-STEP. The expectations for kindergartners and elementary students are different as the assessments are different due to developmental level, but many of the assessments have similar formats. Kindergartners also don't get actual grades, but they do get marks on their report cards that show that they have mastered and what they need to work on. An asterisk means that the student is exceeding expectations in that area. A plus means the student is meeting such expectations. An X shows understanding of the concept. And a minus means that the student needs improvement in the area. It was very interesting to learn about the multitude of assessments that are used in the actual classroom and to see how assessments vary and are used differently based on grade and developmental level. Now I am much more informed on what assessments work and help push students towards success in the classroom, and I am sure to use many of the same assessments in my own classroom someday.